going on the YouTube event?
No, yeah, it's because I didn't hit this button.
Ah.
Okay, now it's live. Let's try this again. Let's mute that page.
There we go.
Okay, how's the sound, everyone? Okay. All right. We'll be starting in just 1 minute. And Lisa, can you try out to say something? See if people hear you.
Can people hear me? Maybe leave a comment in the chat. Okay, great. Thanks.
Amazing. Okay. Okay, and just check if everything here is fine too. Otherwise, okay. Okay, then yeah, it seems like everything is fine and we are not lagging too much. Let me just to be sure add a small delay. Yeah, it's yeah, I think we can make it work with low latency. All right, okay. Thank you everyone for waiting. Thanks for joining the streaming, and we apologize for starting a little bit late today. So I'll just quickly introduce our nice event today. And I want to thank everyone for joining us. Please, if you are interested in joining further events, then yeah, there is a subscribe button, and you can also join our mailing list on crosslabs.org. Yeah, if everybody's ready, then thank you for joining us like every month. So we are thinking together here in this event about what is the nature of intelligence really, and what parts of science can really help us answer our questions about many mechanisms and algorithms that constitute intelligence. So this event is organized by Cross Labs, which is a research institute, a new kind of university about intelligence and cognition, really. And we kind of distill knowledge from disciplines of mind, brain science, mathematics, information dynamics, AI, neural nets, all of that, artificial life, and link it up to new ideas to bring basically new technology. And we are very working very closely with Cross Compass, the AI company. And so this is a monthly, more or less, event, fun public forum for all the science of mind and intelligence. Okay, so tonight, without further ado, I have the pleasure to introduce our speaker, and it's this time a speaker from inside Cross Labs who just joined us this year. So Lisa Soros had. So we have the pleasure to welcome her this year in our team. But before that, she was working at NYU. And before that, I think you have a nice background in many different things. I think you will introduce yourself, but from open-ended evolution to neuroevolution, artificial life, game-oriented AI, also some robotics, evolutionary robotics. I think, yeah. So yeah, maybe I can just let you start. And yeah, we have about half an hour of you presenting interesting topics to us, and after that, as always, we'll have a nice discussion. Okay, thank you all, and yeah, Lisa, it's all yours.
Great, thanks. And yeah, thanks so much everyone for coming out, and thanks for your patience with getting started. So yeah, as Olaf mentioned, I'm a postdoc at Cross Labs now, looking at sort of open-ended things, whether that's open-ended evolution, open-ended intelligent processes, applications to AI, things like that. So let me just go ahead and start sharing. Okay, so running with the theme of having weird technology problems today, PowerPoint Dropbox decided to delete like most of my slides about 20 minutes before we started. So this might be a slightly more abridged version of the presentation than I was intending, but the good news is that sort of leaves more time for discussion at the end. So hopefully you'll join me for that. Yeah, as Olaf mentioned, I basically do a lot of things with evolution, so artificial evolution. So a lot of the themes that I'll be talking about in this presentation will be oriented towards evolution. It's not the only perspective we can have on things like innovation and creativity, but it's what I know about, so that's what I'm going to tell you about. Okay, cool. So what I want to do with this presentation is kind of start off at a higher level talking about what innovation is, what novelty is, ideas like that. What does it mean to discover new things? And to talk about that primarily in the context of biology and technology. And after that, what I'm going to do is focus on algorithms that we basically take inspiration from things like biological evolution and technological evolution and use that to basically generate lots of new things that we as humans can use this technology to either help our creative processes, generate useful things, generate interesting test beds for AI and stuff like that. Okay, so first off, again, this idea of like what is innovation? So it sounds kind of like a buzzword, especially I think in the business world maybe, but the idea of innovation is basically that we are creating things that are very new, and we're thinking about expanding this sort of space of possibilities of things that could exist. So down in the bottom right, we see this idea of inventing things, just coming up with slight variations on things that already exist. Some of those things might actually be novel. So novelty can be relative to basically things we know about. If I discover something that I didn't know about before that's novel to me, it may not be novel to kind of the global world state of things that exist in the world. So that's where innovation comes in. So a true innovation is something that enters the world that didn't exist before. And when it enters the environment, there's a sort of feedback loop where that things presence in the environment then leads to further innovations. And what we want to do is we want to figure out how we can make either real world complex systems or artificial systems generate these kind of innovations or help us find new things. So like I said, I wanted to start out by talking about biological and technological evolution. And the reason is because my ultimate goal is to create a computer program that basically generates interesting new and increasingly complicated kinds of things indefinitely. So instead of trying to sort of reimagine this process of generating like infinitely complex things from scratch, why not take inspiration from systems that we already know have these interesting properties? And if you haven't thought about this before, I don't know, it may or may not be sort of surprising to think of biological evolution and technological evolution as being linked, but there are actually some really interesting relationships. For one, so this example that you're seeing on the screen right now is looking at both biological and technological motors. So we've got jets, motors, then we consider like bats and birds and things like that still need to propel themselves through water or air or whatever they're going through. And we can see that even like no matter what the domain is, if it's biological or if it's technological, you still see these innovations that happen observing similar scaling laws. So that in itself is really interesting. There are a lot of other sort of similarities and differences that I'll go over between these processes. But again, the idea is that you have change that's happening over time. You have, I'll call them individuals. They might be things like animals, or they might be something like an artifact, like again, a motor or something like that. I'm going to use the word individual to talk about all of those. But again, you have these slight variations that are happening over time. Some of them are better than others. Discovering new individuals leads to further discovery of even more individuals, which is pretty interesting. And some of the primary drivers of this change are adaptation and something else called exaptation. So again, the idea with adaptation in the biological context is that you have some sort of change that happens, and hopefully that change doesn't kill you. So in artificial life, a lot of people talk about these environments where you have adaptation constantly happening. So you might have an environment that's changing a lot, and then your population of artificial creatures or life forms or whatever is going to be changing in response to changing environments. So this is also going to be sort of an analog to optimization in more computational systems. So if we want to take an example from biology of adaptation, we might think about this polar bear. So polar bear is adapted to being in cold climates that are really snowy. It has small ears instead of big ones. So that way there's less of an opening for cold air to get in. We're reducing heat loss. White fur helps with the camouflage and also has a lot of body fat to just conserve whatever heat it does have. But there's another idea that's also called pre-adaptation or co-option, which is exaptation. And the idea there is that you have some sort of feature that evolves either for no purpose or for some specific purpose, but then later turns out to be useful for a totally different purpose, which I find really interesting. An example of this would be early feathers, which were on dinosaurs, and these dinosaurs could not fly. So the feathers then served the purpose of either attracting mates or something like that that's not related to flight. But then we got birds, and birds can fly, and feathers are really critical for birds flying. So I find these kind of things really important. And this is a theme I'm going to come back to in this talk over and over again, which is kind of this idea of surprise or designs that weren't necessarily anticipated. And maybe we can find algorithms that'll help us do that. Some of my favorite examples of this sort of phenomenon happening in technology, a classic example is actually the printing press. So Gutenberg's printing press was actually first inspired by a screw press that was used to make wine and olive oil. And then once some other technological innovations happened, came up with the printing press. And my real favorite one is actually the Jacquard loom. So you might notice these things that look like punch cards in the middle of this loom because those are punch cards. And this is what inspired Charles Babbage to work on sort of punch card computing machines that then became the foundation for modern computing. So crafting is actually where modern computing came from, which is really cool, in addition to a lot of other places. But the point of this is that when Jacquard was making his loom, there's no way that he was thinking about punch cards as being useful for computers. Those wouldn't happen until way farther down the line. So trying to figure out how to like maximize the potential for these kind of things is really interesting. Some similarities between technological and biological evolution is there are real world cost constraints. Usually with biology, it has to do with metabolism and things like that. There's also phenomena of design convergence. So you'll have similar discoveries that are made in parallel. One fun fact that I learned is crabs actually evolved like 4 or 5 different times. I think different groups that all evolved independently. So crab locomotion is a very stable, I guess, gait or strategy for being alive. So we keep rediscovering it. And again, these discovery of new innovations lead to new discoveries. That's pretty cool. A couple differences. So individuals in biology, like animals, plants, bacteria, things like that, self-replicate. Sometimes it's sexual reproduction, sometimes it's not, but they generally make copies of themselves. So that doesn't happen with technological evolution. Also in biology, once you come up with some sort of solution to a problem, and we're thinking of this as like the solution to the problem of how do I stay alive, unless there's some sort of extinction event, usually you don't just lose entire populations of animals. So if something better or different comes along, it doesn't necessarily replace what was already there. One downside is that we have to kind of guess about what happened a little bit because we have an imperfect fossil record. And there's more of a sort of wandering and playing and tinkering with things. Whereas luckily with technology, we can study the patent record. Actually, we do have a perfect record of what came from what in some ways. And in this case, when you do have some sort of radical or disruptive technology that comes out that is a real true innovation, you will have a lot of diversity that comes up once that innovation enters, I guess, the market. But then after that, that will actually like cause a lot of competitors to go away. So that's a little bit different. But okay, so that's just the high level overview about, where am I getting this inspiration from? So the question is, can we use ideas from these evolutionary processes to get computers and algorithms to generate innovations for us or help us find them? So like I said, I work primarily in evolutionary algorithms. As Olaf mentioned, I do evolution for neural networks. I do evolution for game components and a whole bunch of other things. So this is by far not an exhaustive survey of all algorithms that help us generate things. This is just kind of an overview, but feel free to ask questions after. So just my highlights. So the basic model for evolution, and this comes from Tim Taylor, who is an open-endedness and artificial life researcher, is you have some sort of genetic description or a genotype, so DNA, and what you're going to do is you are then going to decode that DNA into something that is evaluatable, and that's called a phenotype. So in the real world, this is going to be your DNA makes you, makes living things that exist in a world. But in a computer, we can represent all sorts of things as genomes and phenotypes that we want to actually evolve. So basically, we generate a bunch of stuff, we evaluate it according to some sort of fitness function or something like that, some objective function, and the evolved individuals that that perform the best in this domain we're evaluating them in are then copied and varied a little bit, like mutation, and we do this over and over and over again until hopefully we get to where we want to go. So a very, very simple example is actually this bit string manipulation evolution. So we're going to consider each of these gray boxes, or each of these gray rows arrays, to be a genotype. So it's like the DNA. So basically we just have ones and zeros. Our goal is going to be to get all ones. So let's assume we've got this population size of 4. What we're going to do is we're going to select away the ones. We're going to kill off the ones that have the fewest number of ones. So that's going to be the top and the bottom. So what we do is we then use these other ones and zero strings, and we are going to mutate them a little bit. And hopefully we're going to get something that is similar to these high-fit individuals. And we basically just keep doing this over and over again until we achieve our life stream of getting a string of ones, which is super exciting, really important, but we got it. So that's neat. That's just how basically standard evolutionary algorithms work. But what we can do with this is we can actually apply these algorithms to generating really interesting real-world designs. So this is a case of NASA basically applied evolutionary algorithms to designing an antenna, and interestingly came up with this design that no human would probably make. So this looks like something that's kind of like a tree. It's actually very efficient, which is interesting. But again, this is something that would probably surprise a human designer or an engineer that was tasked with trying to make one of these antennae. Next, I want to jump to talking about, let's skip forward in the future a bit, a system called PickBreeder that was active. I think this doesn't have the year on it, but this was from about 2008 or 2009. And what this was an interactive evolution system for generating pictures. So people, humans, could go on a website, you are presented with a screen like this, you select the pictures you like, and the ones that you select are then the individuals that get chosen as the parents for the next generation, stuff like that. And this ended up giving us some sort of surprising results that I think will motivate the rest of the algorithms I want to talk about. So we get these neat phylogenetic trees where the top is the first picture that was bred, and then all of these other children are just, again, mutated versions of pictures that people liked and they selected. But some of these pictures that came out of the system, like this one that looks like a skull and this one that looks like a butterfly, you actually have to do this interactive selection kind of thing in order to find the pictures. So if you just took a regular evolutionary algorithm and applied it started from this starting point up here and said, okay, I would like to search for the skull. If you do that, and what you're selecting for is just how closely does this image resemble the skull, you won't get it. It just doesn't happen. It's like this weird phenomenon. So Ken Stanley, my PhD advisor, calls this the objective paradox. So for a lot of really interesting problems, you basically need to have some amount of something that's going to incentivize exploration in your search space, right? So this led to the development of an algorithm called novelty search. And the idea with novelty search is basically instead of searching directly, instead of having an explicit objective, just try to select for things that are different from what you've seen before. So the classic example is this is a maze. So this is this open circle. The bigger one at the bottom is the start of the maze, and then the top is the end of the maze. And if you basically just say, okay, I'm going to select for the maze navigating agents, I'm going to select for the neural networks that control the simulated robots that gets me closest to my goal, just like Euclidean distance or something like that, you actually can't solve the maze. So we've seen this in simulations. Objective-based optimization does not allow you to solve the maze, but novelty search does eventually find solutions to the maze. So this idea kind of radically transformed evolutionary computation. But again, it's interesting because here we're taking an algorithm that's just explicitly searching for new things. That's all it does, basically. So, is that an innovation? I don't know. It's not, but trying to figure out how to search for innovations themselves is pretty interesting. So, okay, so that's just the real quick things I'm interested in with evolutionary computation. But I want to take a minute to talk about GANs, generative adversarial networks, for a minute, because they're pretty neat. And again, they are a way that we can take some data and then generate new things based on the data that we have. So here's a description of how these networks are set up. But the basic idea is you have one network that tries to generate fake data points that the other network then looks at and tries to decide if they're real or fake. So initially, what you start off with is the generated data is not very good, and the discriminator can tell that that's obviously very fake, but over time you get increasingly better data points. But what's interesting to me is actually not the stuff that looks really good like this. GANs have this, basically they create this space, this latent space of things that kind of resemble real world data points, and some of them don't, and we'll see that in a minute. It can be really fun. But okay, we don't have the interface for that. That's fine. What would be here if Dropbox hadn't just totally did something weird earlier is a picture of ArtBreeder. Actually, I can show it to you because I am on a browser. So if you ever want to go play with this, it's pretty fun. You can go to artbreeder.com, and basically this is a system that was inspired by PickBreeder. And what you can do is you can pick a picture and then you can mutate the pictures to get new pictures. And this is a GAN on the back end. So that's why I explained GANs. So you just select the ones you like, you get more things like it. And that's pretty neat. So all of these images are completely fake. They're GAN generated. So these are AI generated landscapes. We have some AI generated anime characters. And then I'm just going to go ahead and leave this one here for a minute because I really, really love bad GAN stuff. So a lot of times you'll see examples of GANs making nice things, but GANs don't necessarily, what they learn isn't really grounded in how the world works. So we look at these things and we know that these are not okay dogs. These are really not okay dogs. But the GAN doesn't really know that. So an interesting challenge lately has been basically, well, how do we take this GAN stuff and take the weird part of the GAN and then fix it? So practical applications like this, these systems have become really popular lately in procedural content generation for games. So what you can do is take a data set of a bunch of video game levels, throw a GAN at them or throw them into a GAN, and then basically search for the things that are good or fix them. In this case, this work by Vanessa Volz and a couple of other people, they generated Mario levels and then basically took an evolutionary algorithm and used it to search the latent space of the GAN to find levels that were actually good and not super broken. So you get playable levels where you can then choose to minimize the number of jumps that someone has to do or maximize the number of jumps and stuff like that, which is pretty fun. So there is some similar recent work that basically, instead of taking the problem of let's take all this GAN generated stuff and just filter out the bad ones, you can guarantee with this method that everything you generate is going to be good, or rather once it's bad, like in this case, it's a Pac-Man level where you can see the endpoints don't really line up over here. You repair it to fix the GAN weirdness, and then you get video game levels. So that's practically useful. Yeah, I think I'm going to skip this one. But coming back to evolution for a bit, I think one of the reasons I find this really interesting and why I think evolution is probably some sort of necessary component for coming up with these open-ended innovation systems is that they genuinely can surprise us. We're not dependent on having some sort of data set that we're sampling from, and they do really weird things. So here's a couple examples, and I would highly recommend, if you find any of this fun, checking out this paper that's listed at the bottom about the surprising creativity of digital evolution. Basically, a lot of researchers from evolutionary computation and artificial life kind of collected these stories of evolution just doing surprising things, doing strange things. So I'll highlight a couple of examples of that. So in this example, the task was to evolve a simulated creature, a virtual creature morphology is body. So the goal was to find something that walks, but an evolutionary algorithm figured out that it's easier to design something that falls well. So if your objective is to get your body to end up far from where it started, then you just evolve a really long, tall body that just falls over and then kind of like cheeses the objective a little bit. There's another example of this happening in a different virtual creatures domain. So the goal was to jump really high, and then it turns out that, again, it's easier to fall and just to evolve this body shape that has this really long like pole. So that thing ends up like pole vaulting instead of actually learning how to jump, which is kind of interesting. These algorithms are also really good for finding glitches and bugs in games, which is something that I've been interested in lately. So this is an example of throwing an evolutionary algorithm at Qbert. So in Qbert, you basically want to not die, like you want to get rid of the enemies. So in this case, using an evolutionary algorithm exposed a bug where the player, who's in orange, actually learns to like jump off the game level, and then the enemy follows them and dies. So what should happen is you should lose points for that. You don't lose points for that. It turns out that's a really good way to game the system. So evolution is just really good for finding these kind of bugs and glitches and things. And this one was pretty fun too. So you can use evolutionary algorithms for testing robots, basically. So this was an example of the task was for the robot arm to grasp this box, and what was being tested was actually fixing like the grasper so that it can't open. So the robot hand should not be able to pick up the box, but instead, as you can see in part C, it finds like this really specific angle to sort of slam the grasper down on, so that it ends up being able to pick up the box anyhow, even though it can't like open its little pinchers. So yeah, evolution does weird things. If you break all of the robot's legs, it learns to crawl on its back anyhow, just due to the way the physics simulation works. It's very fun. But okay, so the last sort of bit I want to talk about briefly is the role of serendipity and chance in discovering things. So if we think about how, I guess, humans come up with ideas, sometimes we sit down and we design things for a very intentional purpose. And sometimes we make these accidental discoveries that turn out to be really useful. So one case of this happening is actually in the discovery of saccharin, which is what's on the left. It was discovered by a chemist named Konstantin Fallberg, who was actually working on coal tar. And he forgot to wash his hands after working in the lab, came home, had what turned out to be saccharin on his hands that was, again, supposed to be some sort of coal tar byproduct, wondered why everything tasted really sweet, and then realized that like this chemical was just left on his hands. So he wasn't trying to make something sweet. He wasn't trying to make a product like that. It just sort of happened by accident. So a question then is, how can we make algorithms that sort of make these serendipitous, lucky discoveries and find things more by chance? So it turns out you can actually just design algorithms based on surprise. You can say, I want to be surprised. So this is a bit similar to a novelty search. It's called surprise search, except what you have is in the evolutionary loop, there's a neural network that's going to try to predict what you're going to find next. And the goal is to maximize that amount of surprise. So how much do you deviate from the prediction? And these algorithms are evaluated in a lot of, I would say, like traditional evolutionary computation domains, like that's our friend the hard maze again, so maze navigation, some generative art that kind of illustrates, I think, what the algorithm's kind of doing. These are level plans for something in Unreal, so we've got a video game level generation. But I think the big question, and hopefully some of you have maybe some ideas, I don't know, is sort of what kind of domains would actually foster this idea of like open-ended innovation? Because even with surprise search, which is a really cool algorithm, you basically can do one kind of thing. You can be surprised by the way you navigate the maze, or you can be surprised by the kind of art you make or something like that. But these kind of domains, we need something else if we're going to actually get the sort of breadth of and diversity of and complexity of things that we see in the real world, whether we're talking about biology and strategies for being alive, or if we're talking about things we can invent, again, technological evolution. So in the field of artificial life, which I've been in that community for a little bit, really fantastic people doing a lot of work on these sort of, well, what if we reimagined what biology was like, or chemistry or physics or stuff like that, like what would happen? So people have been imagining a lot of sort of domains that this idea of like open-endedness and innovation can come from. So this is a system that's very popular called Avita. In this case, you are actually taking like logic gates and functions, or not gates, just logical functions, and composing them as the sort of individuals that live in the world, and then trying to get some sort of open-ended dynamics from that, and this continual innovation again. Other people make more sort of abstract video game like, well, I would call them more like zero-player video games. That's my wording, not everybody else's, and I don't mean that in a negative way. But these more embodied worlds, this one's called Polyworld from 1994. Evosphere was 2003, maybe a little later. But anyhow, you can see that people have different ideas about like what individuals and worlds should look like and how environments should co-evolve with the things in them, and it's pretty interesting. So that's basically the end. Like I said, I'm very curious about this question of like, what kind of domains do you think could be open-ended in some way, with the goal of open-endedness here, again, being this idea of like continual innovation. And I guess the idea is that hopefully we find a domain that helps us figure out what we don't know, because there's a lot that we don't know yet, but you don't know what you don't know. So, all right, that's pretty much it.
All right, thank you so much, Lisa. So we'll be starting so first, virtual claps from everyone. Yeah, we'll be starting the discussion session, I guess. In order to do that, you can just join us here. Anyone with the link that I'm posting now on YouTube can join. And please mute yourself. Yeah, so thanks from YouTube, I guess. I think you see the chat as well.
Yep.
So this is the Zoom link, because it will disappear later when we go offline. Yeah, we'll be answering any questions also that go. And maybe Lisa, you can show maybe you can show the full screen presentation mode of the Slido.
Oh, yep.
The link that I sent you earlier.
Yep.
And yeah, if you post questions, it's easy if you also put your name, so we know who asked the question. And if you want, you can come and ask the question on Zoom if you feel like it.
Yep. Okay, so it looks like okay, top. Cool.
So yeah, I'll make sure some questions come up. So there is a first anonymous question. Do we have the person who asked the question here? Otherwise, I'll just read it. Once, going twice. Okay, so what kind of domains have you tested your algorithms and did not work well? That's the failure question.
Yeah, that's a question. I guess it kind of depends what you mean by didn't work well. I would say one thing that's hard sometimes is applying, if we're talking about the more like optimization kind of algorithms where there is some actual goal that we want to like solve a problem, and we're not talking so much about the like, let's build a virtual world that evolves forever or something like that. Doing anything that requires expensive simulations is hard. So that can be certain kinds of robotics problems, anything that requires really like complicated physics solvers, just because evolution takes a really, really, really long time usually to do stuff. So if you actually have to wait like a full minute for something to like solve the physics, that's probably going to be really hard for evolution to do. So that's not really like a conceptual limitation or like a kind of an interesting problem, but practically I think it is like something where it's hard to apply evolution to those kind of systems. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Cool. And I think for our next question, Klaus, do you wanna speak up?
Oh, sure. Lisa, thank you so much for the talk. It was very nice. I'm familiar with novelty search, but this is the first time that I hear about surprise search. So maybe could you expand a little bit more in the difference between the two?
Sure. So I think practically, and I kind of just learned about this recently, so I would definitely recommend looking for the papers on that. But from what I understand, part of the goal is to get around the problem of the behavior characterizations. So if you just have a model that's kind of predicting what's going to be next, that can help. But so that was something that I've been trying to also like figure out by myself for myself a bit, because at first they do sound like very similar. You're still searching based on the idea of like, I want to find something that's new. So the main difference, as far as I understand, is that with novelty search, it's you're I was going to say it's more like subjective. It's more a
Well, from what you described, I mean, I have not read the paper, but from what you describe, it seems like novelty search tries to look for difference in the existing population, because usually novelty search, like you compare a new individual to the population and you have a novelty measure. And surprise search would be like more, okay, what will this genome generate? I mean, that kind of makes sense for reinforcement learning. I don't know about other domains. Interesting.
Yeah, I know surprise search definitely outperforms novelty search in a lot of interesting tasks. So like whatever that subtle difference is, it actually matters. But,
all right, I'll try to take a look at that. Thank you.
yeah, sorry I don't have more information on that one.
Okay, thanks, Klaus. And next question is by Antoine. Let's see, he's not connected, so I'll read it. Okay, so one reason for design convergence in technology might be knowledge sharing, but what could be a reason in biology?
Yeah, so that's definitely, I would say that, that's not the reason in biology, especially because we're talking about, if you're talking about the idea of like crabs, for instance, they aren't telling each other how to get better. They don't like see other crabs and then decide that crabs are a good thing to be. So I don't entirely know, other than just some strategies are just more stable. So if something makes you less likely to die, or if it makes it easier for you to get food, that sometimes incentivizes like those kinds of forms still existing in the world. It's not the only thing that causes things to stay in the world. One idea I didn't talk about very much in the talk or at all is this idea of sort of survival of the selection or survival of the fittest versus survival of the fit enough. So I think that some of these biological converged designs just happen to be like very stably in that it's good enough and it doesn't kill you. But also, if there are any evolutionary biologists in the crowd that want to chime in on that one, feel free.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting topic. But essentially the environment could be considered to be the reason for convergence, right? Like if you have one designed or obvious maximum or some kind of shape, of course, like any kind of search will follow that kind of structure in the environment, right? So you could have convergences that are kind of pre-designed by the environment by being what it is. The difference, I guess, in technology is that the environment is constantly changing, arguably much more in cultural evolution than in biological evolution. But yeah, that's also very arguable. Yeah, if anyone has comments in the people on Zoom, please raise your hand or just post the question. You can speak up right here in Zoom. Okay, so that's an interesting topic. Maybe we'll come back to it. Next question is by Oneris. I don't know if Oneris is connected. I'll just read it out now. So being a bit anthropocentric, that's okay. Have you bumped into cases where AI solves a problem the same way we humans do? I love that uncanny valley. That's right.
Yeah. I mean, for some problems, for sure, just if there is just an objective like best solution and we would find it, then an optimization algorithm might also find it. So I think to sort of flip the question a little bit, these cases where we see these, well, I was going to say two different things. I was going to say sometimes when you see like the weird solutions to things, it might just be that, Yeah, sometimes it's just we're already good at solving the problems. So if it's easy for us to optimize, then it is probably easy for an optimization algorithm to just find that exact same solution. But thinking about the cases like the antenna that evolution found a really weird solution to, maybe, and this is not really meant to be an insult against engineers or something, but it's just maybe sometimes we don't do the best job at solving problems because we're humans and we're kind of flawed sometimes. We don't always know the best way to do it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's also that's also a very large question. Yeah, I wonder if we shouldn't take Marek's question because it addresses what we were just talking about right before.
Mm-hmm.
So have you considered, or Marek, do you want to speak up, or should I read it? I'll start reading it. So have you considered the domain of memes, memetic evolution, generating novel memes, novel critics, novel spreaders, and evolution of these? I guess it's also connected directly to what we were talking about before in terms of innovation in technology versus in biology. Yeah, what's the difference between the cultural aspects of things? Yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm not super familiar with that idea, so no, I haven't really considered that. If you have any ideas, feel free to, I guess, share them. I don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah. Well, mimetic evolution is this. It became a kind of dangerous, slippery slope kind of area. With yeah, I guess Susan Blackmore is leading that side of things. After first Dawkins threw in the concept of meme. After that, yeah, I think there are very interesting evolutionary dynamics that can exist in cultural systems where, that cannot exist just with biological evolution. I think it's interesting to look at that. It's mostly just channels of communication that are different.
Yeah,
I think that's interesting.
if I may offer a comment
Mhm.
about mimetic evolution, I mean, the basic idea of mimetic evolution is that we have this level of information that is spread about the individuals. In terms of evolutionary computation as optimization, this used to be discussed as Lamarckian evolution. In the evolutionary computation for optimization community. So you have the information that is passed directly in the individual. So that might be somewhere to look if you're interested in that kind of concept.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, it could be. Yeah, yeah. So sometimes it's connected to that. Yeah, it doesn't have to be. So I think
Yeah.
I think that they're nice. Yeah, there are nice relations between cultural and biological evolution as co-evolutions. And I think looking at those kind of co-evolutions creates new algorithms. And a few groups that are interested in these questions of, well, I guess surprise search or other kind of novelty searches, all of this open-ended kind of algorithmics, yeah, can really profit from co-evolutionary processes. So this means, yeah, this means a large group of things. Maybe we can go more in depth in the next step of the discussion. All right.
Sorry. Okay.
Yeah. So let's see. Yeah, the next question is from you, Klaus. Oh, about open-endedness.
Yeah, this is more a comment answering, giving one answer to Lisa's question about, okay, what would be a good environment for one environment that I'm always like fascinated by is just going straight to let's just evolve programs. And like there was an artificial life environment around the same period that Avida was released, was Core Wars. And Core was basically, there was this stack of memory and you could run programs and different parts of the memory would be executed and the programs would execute in that and the programs could reproduce. And there was one researcher that did like an evolution on Core Wars. And basically the programs managed to evolve like viruses. They would enter each other and use each other's evolution. So that was really cool. I think that doing open-ended evolution on the space of programs like open-ended evolution with genetic programming is something that is really really interesting. I mean, the best part is that it sidesteps the metaphors. We don't need to worry about, oh, is this light? Is this food?
Mhm.
It's a program.
Yeah, I guess my only question is like, what would you change? Like, what didn't work before that we would change, for going back to this paradigm that people have been using for a while?
What do you mean by what didn't what was one wasn't working before?
Oh, um, well, let's assume that we haven't achieved open-endedness yet,
Yeah,
uh, right? And that people have been doing work in core war environments for a bit. But just what's next? What's like the future of open-endedness and core wars?
I don't know. I haven't moved that yet, but I was just thinking that, I mean, um, not thinking about core wars in particular, core wars more as an example, but open-endedness in the sense of building programs.
Right, sure.
Because we can have programs that like draw images, or programs that count, programs that make sorting algorithms. So if the evolution of programs in general seems to be something that would be really hard but really cool in terms of open-endedness, because programs can do anything, right?
Mm.
Hmm.
I guess we could
Yeah.
jump to the next. Oh,
Yeah. I was just reading on the. Yeah, I was just reading on YouTube. Sorry, the question by I think Yuri Lavinas commented about the archive paper on surprise search. That's quite interesting. I guess related to that comment. Yeah, what is this surprise? Just reading from the archives paper, I'll quote him. Novelty and surprise are different notions by definition, as it is possible for a solution to be both novel and or expected to varying degrees. Okay, so novelty is defined as the degree to which a solution is different from prior solutions to a particular problem. So that's actually difficult to measure. How do you measure in the right way the difference from expected solution? What is the expected solution in the problem? What would be a good way to tackle that?
right.
Only questions, obviously, yeah.
Yeah. No. So what that got me thinking about is just the idea that you can use those algorithms for solving problems, but a lot of times they're used for generating a lot of different kinds of things where there isn't necessarily just like a target solution to the problem that we can imagine, which isn't really answering your question. But
it's fine. I don't have an answer either, or maybe I have many answers. So maybe that goes into the next section of the discussion, where we just throw ideas around. Okay, so let's see. Next question is the fact that we are implementing algorithms based on biological evolution, isn't it limiting open-endedness? Yeah, that one.
yeah, I'm not sure if I feel like I want more information on this question. Like why, whoever wrote this, why do we feel that biological evolution would be limiting open-endedness? I'd also like to just, I guess, note that the goal a lot of times, especially when we're talking about more of these like open-ended algorithms, like evolutionary computation, evolutionary algorithms are not really open-ended, especially if you're trying to apply them to some kind of optimization problem. But we can take a bit of liberty when we're designing our algorithms on like which parts of biological evolution that we want to try to re-implement in our algorithm. So it doesn't have to be like a perfect match with biological evolution. But
Yeah. I guess when we say evolutionary algorithm, we are not trying to imitate point to point mapping exactly what is happening out there in biology. And I guess any kind of bio-inspired computing is not really trying to to mimic exactly what is happening in there, but just capturing interesting processes that are generating, generating information or interesting search patterns to find new solutions out there that we usually don't search, or not, at least not in that way. So yeah, so in a sense, yes, any kind of choice limits your freedom by definition, right? So, but yeah, but also you can find the right, I guess, information pattern to search any space. So yeah, yeah. But maybe if the person wanted to follow that up, that would be interesting to see what they are thinking exactly. Otherwise, yeah, next question is, it seems to me that these approaches will ultimately rely on massive amounts, I guess, of computation and scaling. What's the largest scale experiment in novelty / EC evolutionary computation you're aware of?
Good question. I guess I would ask, like, scale with respect to what sort of, in terms of sort of, I don't know if it's like things being distributed or whatever, like actually systems like PickBreeder where it's crowdsourced by humans are kind of interesting because you have a lot of different sort of searches going on at the same time. So that's not like explicitly a novelty search or something like that. And maybe some people, so PickBreeder again was that system where we're like evolving pictures on the internet, but you had a lot of different users with a lot of different kinds of motivations and different kinds of things they liked. So in some sense, I would consider that to be an interesting and pretty large scale novelty evolutionary computation kind of thing. What was the other thing I was thinking of? There was something. Yeah. Oh no, it just reminded me of Richard Lenski's long-term evolution experiment. So that's not necessarily an evolutionary computation kind of thing, but in other sort of domains where artificial life-y people are looking at these sort of evolutionary dynamics, I don't remember how many years that's been going on for. If it's like on the order of it's decades, like for sure. So that's not necessarily a scale of like the algorithm scaling, but evolution in general, if you have a large enough domain, or if you're slowed down by real time and real things growing, you need to use a lot of time, which is sort of interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I was wondering also in terms of, well, maybe more in general, when you mentioned acceptations or similar patterns in biology, how does applying that to I guess the field of science innovation and technology innovation, do you think can help us basically predict or understand better the evolution of basically technology that we can create?
Yeah, I've been wondering about that, like if it would be to me, I don't know, somehow like predicting what kind of technologies will emerge or what things will be useful for seems really hard. But if we could do it, that would be really interesting. It's like one of the reasons I find acceptation very useful in a practical sense, like if we can figure out or identify these sort of times when acceptation might be possible, is it's easier to take something that already exists and repurpose it than it is to design something from scratch. So like there's this practical sort of, well, if we can just sort of mess with these like inventions that we already have, technologies we already have, maybe that reduces waste, reduces cost, stuff like that. Maybe it doesn't. I'm not a business person, so don't take my business advice. But
yeah.
But I mean, the theoretical part of that, besides the like practical, can we identify something that's going to be cost saving, is a bit interesting because it does require, again, sort of like predicting the future or knowing what something's useful for in some sort of objective way, which I don't think is super easy. So like, how do we have an algorithm that tells us what something's purpose is, or like in what contexts it would be useful?
Yeah, that sounds like a grand algorithm. But of course, those kind of those kind of implementations are often unrealistic, and at the end of the day, prediction is close to impossible. But understanding patterns better allows you to basically invest better in different kind of maybe research directions or investments in business also. So I guess that's kind of worth having a better map of things. Yeah, but so there are certainly algorithms that could help at the end of the day. I was thinking a bit about how this by allowing for serendipity, those kind of ideas that you talked about sounded a lot like ideas from reservoir computing or morphological computing, those kind of things, in which, well, you kind of create relational maps that don't serve you any purpose right now, right? They don't implement anything right now, but can do it in the future. So kind of creating this kind of reservoir of algorithms is kind of the idea maybe behind, and then giving some kind of what is the biological analogy? I guess some kind of plateau where like fitness wise, where you can then go in different ways and more freely arrange and and kind of combine your next step in terms of new algorithms.
Yeah, I have like just recently learned these words for this stuff, so I'm excited to go check that out then if it that sounds interesting.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess we went through our list of pressing questions for now. So I'm guessing we can go into a more general discussion. If anyone wants to discuss, I will actually disconnect from, except if there is any more question, I disconnect from the streaming, and we can just have a nice chat or a drink, depending, corresponding to your time zone right now. Okay, so I want to thank again Lisa for the very nice talk, and for everyone for joining. So yeah, let's keep chatting a little bit, and we'll be off stream very soon. Thanks. And I'm struggling to find the button as always.